All right, chapter 13 of the AP World History textbook, Interactions and Traditions. This one will focus on the Commonwealth of Byzantium. The early Byzantine Empire was built on the old Greek town of Byzantium. Constantine had moved the Roman capital to here in 330 CE and renamed it after himself to Constantinople. Its location was very valuable in terms of commerce and strategy, as it was located between the Black and Mediterranean Seas, two important bodies of water for trade. However, in 1453, the city would fall to the Turks, being renamed Istanbul, but that comes much later. This Byzantine Empire inherits the mantle of the Roman Empire after Western Rome falls in 5 centuries CE. These eastern territories proved to be a major power until the 13th century CE. They always called themselves Romans, even though they changed their language from Latin to Greek officially. And they were only called Byzantine until Byzantine by historians almost 1,000 years later. Actually, more than 1,000 years later. This society is the only classical civilization to actually make it to the early modern era. Now, this later Roman Empire had the advantage of having Roman infrastructure in place in the east, such as roads and institutional hierarchies. However, it continued to suffer. It suffered challenges from a strong Persian Empire, the Sassanid dynasty, which ruled from 224 to 641 CE, and from Germanic peoples. However, the East was rich/strong enough to buy them off or defeat them in combat. Oops, sorry. So yeah, this is a statue of Constantine, aka Constantine the Great, or if I do recall this correctly, the head of it. This head is actually gigantic. Can't really tell because there's nothing to scale, but evidently, yeah. This is a map of Constantinople, and or at least the major features of it. We have the Hagia Sophia here, the Great Palace, the Hippodrome, the Forums, and also the supposedly impregnable walls of Constantinople that surround and defend the city. The Eastern Roman Emperor, he created his power and position basically created this new idea of something called Caesaropapism, in which the emperor had absolute authority in both politics and religion. As his absolute authority suggests, the power was centralized in the office of the emperor. However, as a Christian leader, he cannot claim divinity. He can't say he's God. However, he can say that he has the divine right to rule. Now, the rituals have reinforced this, the importance of the Byzantine emperor. Only he could wear royal purple robes, and guests had to engage in elaborate rituals of prostration rituals. You can only approach the emperor in a certain way, talk to him in a certain way. You must bow down a certain number of times, bow a certain way, kiss his hands, yada, 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 in order to demonstrate that whoever is the guest is inferior to the emperor in terms of status and divinity. Well, not divinity, but more of status and power. Sorry about that. Engineers constructed mechanical devices to inspire awe. Basically, these devices would do various amazing things in the throne room, such as creating these fake animals that can actually move, or lifting the throne up and down in order to seem as if he is, he has some mysterious magic or force that he can command at his will. Think of it as the Wizard of Oz, essentially. The empire reaches its greatest extent under a man named Justinian, who reigned from 527 to 565 CE. He was known as the sleepless emperor. He was known as the sleepless emperor due to his vigorous work ethic. One of the most influential people in his life was his wife Theodora, a former scriptor turned now advisor and co-emperor. At Theodora's advice, instead of just fleeing the city, when a hooligan riot between the Greens and Blues breaks out, he has his army crush the riots. Now, however, the riots have destroyed a large portion of the city, and Justinian sees this as an opportunity to launch large and ambitious reconstruction programs. One of the products of this was the Church of Hagia Sophia, with the first great dome in Europe. Western Europe really wouldn't get something as monumental in terms of a covered dome until like over a millennium later during the Renaissance. For example, Brunelleschi. He codified Roman law into something called the Body of Civil Law, or the Digest, and he came close to reconquering what used to be the Western Roman Empire. So this is a mural from the Basilica of, I forget. Well, it's from a basilica in Italy. This mural depicts Justinian in the very center with a halo and wearing royal purple, emphasizing the fact that he has a divine right to rule, and that he is very important. He is the boss. He is in charge. There's no questions asked of who is in authority. This is another mural depicting Empress Theodora, which is actually on the opposite side of the mural depicting Justinian. This one portrays Theodora with her attendants. As we can see, she's wearing a royal purple and wears an elaborate headdress and jewelry to signify her importance. This is what now it's a mosque, but this is to give you an idea what the interior of the Hagia Sophia is. This is basically a picture depicting it. When the Ottomans took over Constantinople in 1453, they converted Hagia Sophia into a mosque. So they removed all the Christian murals and images and replaced them with Arabic inscriptions and vegetative lines. However, when it was still a church, it would have had images like the ones here, like the one there. Sorry. Like I said before, Justinian actually managed to reconquer some Roman territories, thanks to a guy named his general Belisarius. However, the Byzantines are unable to consolidate control of these territories, because these territories keep wanting to go their own separate ways. Due to Sassanid and Slavic threats, Byzantine military forces were withdrawn to defend the core part of the empire. It didn't help the fact that they also had a plague. And thus, from 541 to 750, there were basically just off and on conflicts. So, we can see, visit the Byzantine Empire in 527. Under Justinian, just expands significantly to northern Africa, southern Spain, Italy. They even get Rome, and it mentioned encroach on Visigoth and Frank territory. But of course, you had the Sassanids, who are a very powerful empire, and they are constantly threatening. They constantly threat the Byzantines. So the Byzantines are like, "Oh, screw it. We gotta focus on these guys more than these territories out here, and conquests." In the 7th century, Arab Muslims began rapidly expanding their territorial control. They began to gobble up large chunks of the Byzantine Empire, and were even able to besiege Constantinople in 674 to 678, and later from 717 to 718. However, the Byzantines were able to successfully repel these invasions for the use of a weapon called Greek fire, basically a horrifying flamethrower contraption. Now, the empire was far from dead. In fact, this empire was still resilient and actually was much more manageable. Plus, it had plenty of great days ahead. So this is a map depicting the three major power brokers in the Middle East: either the Byzantine Empire, the Sassanids, and Arabia. Arabia would become the Muslim Arabs here would prove a major threat to the Byzantines and the Sassanids, as I mentioned before. They actually managed to conquer the Sassanid Empire, basically spread Islam to local people, and eventually began encroaching onto Byzantine territory. The Byzantines also, in order to better manage their empire, they organized it, they organized it into themes or provinces under control of the generals. Military and civil administration were combined. However, the generals kept a tight leash on the empire from the central imperial government. Basically, it was this the system of rule was characterized by elaborate scheming and intrigue, especially for gaining of political power or favor. The soldiers from the peasant class composed the backbone of the army, and they were fiercely loyal to the empire since they were rewarded with land grants, which were formed from broken up great estates. And and to think of the relationship, between the kings, aristocrats, and peasants, think of it as the kings and the peasants versus the aristocrats. However, the aristocrats managed to, after several hundred years, reamass their land and bribe their way out of taxation. This would end up crippling the Byzantine Empire because less land for peasants means less people to join the army, and also less taxation means that where the taxes end up falling, the poor, and that ends up causing discontent later on. The Byzantine Empire has tensions with Western Europe. Particularly, one issue was the Church. The Byzantines use Greek, whereas the Romans in the West use Latin. There are also conflicts over hierarchical control. The East was better educated and thus viewed the viewed the West as uncouth and barbaric, whereas the West viewed the East as The East because the East was better educated, they viewed the West as uncouth and uneducated barbarians, whereas the West viewed the East as sneaky and sly. Additionally, loyalty of Germanic people, the fight to gain the loyalty of Germanic peoples, also caused tensions between the West and the East. The Roman Pope crowns Charlemagne in 800, which is a direct challenge to Byzantine authority. The Pope continues to challenge the Roman Catholic Church in the Church in the West continues to challenge the Byzantines by crowning Odo of Saxony as the Holy Roman Emperor in 962. Constantinople was the largest city in Europe from 5 to 13th century CE. Its brilliant and duplicitous diplomacy helped magnify its strength and basically allowed it to punch above its weight. And trade routes could actually brought key technologies, especially the silk industry, which they managed to somehow obtain from China, who had kept it highly secret. Cracking the Silk Road was a huge economic boost, allowing them, making them more commercially competitive. Moreover, Constantinople was located at the center of East, West, and North-South trade. Therefore, you get even more goods and ideas coming in. The Byzantine currency was a coinage of trade well beyond its borders, further demonstrating strengthening Byzantium's the Byzantine Empire's commercial strength. It's kind of like how the dollar is in the modern world, how the dollar plays such an integral role as a currency, and they also managed to large tax revenues from the Transcontinental Silk Road 2.0 managed to fill up Byzantine coffers. They also developed banking services. In terms of the Church, the Council of Nicea in 325 bans the Arian movement, which argued that Jesus Christ was a human. Like I said, this fight, this fight was over, is Jesus human or divine? The council says Jesus is both human and divine. While Constantine initially favors the Arians, he eventually supports the Nicene recommendation, and by 6th century Christianity is the dominant cultural community of the area. As I said before, thanks to Caesaropapism, the church and state are very closely aligned, with the Byzantine emperors actually appointing the patriarchs, or the heads of the Byzantine Church. This creates unease and dissent in the church. Now, there was this weird, self-weakening period called the iconoclastic period. To give you the background idea, icons are artistic representations of saints, Mary, and Jesus. In 726, a guy named Emperor Leo III demands the destruction of all icons after 726 CE, for purely religious reasons, believing them to be heresy. It might be possible that he would suggest that he was influenced by the iconoclasm of Islam, but the policy doesn't work. It ends up prompting popular protests, riots, and resistance. The policy is unsurprisingly abandoned in 843 CE. This was, like I said before, this period was self-defeating because it just created more dissent in the empire. Now, while the elites were basically arguing over fine points of theology, the monks had strong influence on the common people because they were examples of devout piety. Provided some social services, and led the resistance to iconoclasm. Now, you also get the introduction of asceticism to Christianity in the Eastern Roman Empire because of contacts with the East. These ascetics would live hermit-like existences, practice celibacy, fasting, prayer, austerity. One of them was Saint Simeon Stylite, lived atop a pillar for years. And at Mount Athos, they allowed no woman or female animals, believing that they were distractions. Like as before, the West and East Christians don't necessarily get along very well. There are ritual disputes. For example, should clergy be allowed to have beards? Should leavened or unleavened bread be used for mass? Some other theological disputes. The whole issue of iconoclasm. That the Eastern Roman Empire for a brief period has that little, wacko. Let's destroy all the icons. The Western Europe is horrified by this. There are also debates over the nature of the Trinity. However, the main reason for the Great Schism that would follow would be arguments over hierarchy and jurisdiction. The question was, who's really in charge, the patriarchs or the Pope of Rome? This all comes to a head in 1054 when the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Pope of Rome excommunicate each other from the Church. First, in the East, you get the rise of the Orthodox Church, and in the West, the rise of the Roman Catholic Church. Though the Byzantine Empire had the final glory days until Basil II, the Bulgar Slayer, in the early 1800s, it was beginning to slowly fade away. Western Europe was beginning to economically develop, and the Normans in Italy, who came from Scandinavia via France, were actually putting pressure on Byzantine territories. The Crusades of the 12th to 13th centuries that rampaged through the Byzantine territory absolutely devastated the Byzantine economy. For example, Constantinople being sacked in 1204 on the Fourth Crusade. Moreover, you get challenges from the east. The Muslim Seljuk Turks invade Anatolia, and this threatens the grain supply. They eventually defeat this Byzantine army, prompting civil conflict within the empire, and this ushers in a period of steady decline until the Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople in 1453, which they renamed Istanbul. So this is a map depicting the Byzantine Empire into its major, rival neighbors. And around 1100, we have the Norman possessions. Here. Ironically, the Normans came from here-ish, Northern Europe. And then on the east, you have this gigantic territory under Islam. This gigantic Islamic territory stretching all the way from Persia to Spain, down the Nile River into Egypt, and as we can see, they managed to conquer parts of Anatolia, therefore threatening Constantinople's grain supply. Now, Byzantine culture, despite the fact that Constantinople would fall in 1453, would have tremendous effects on the Slavic people, with the relations beginning in the 6th century CE. Bulgaria was influenced culturally and politically, and Saints Cyril and Methodius create a Cyrillic alphabet based on a combination of Greek and a little bit of the local Slavic languages for the Slavs to learn. The Slavs adopted as their language. and as a result, these lands develop an orientation to Byzantium. As a result, you get the rise of a kingdom called Kievan Rus. It begins with the conversion of Prince Vladimir in 989 CE, and the Byzantine culture heavily influenced the development of Slavic cultures, with a distinctively Slavic Orthodox Church developing. Eventually, Kievan Rus begins to view itself as the kingdom that would come late. Eventually Kievan Rus and later Russia would view themselves as the heir to Byzantium or the Third Rome, especially after Constantinople falls in 1453.